Okay, so I'm calling to order the Ad hoc Sustainability and Resilience Committee Common Council. Today is November 9th. The meeting was to start at 6:07, but I had computer problems. Sorry that we're running late. We have Josh Goldstein and me of the committee. We're hoping that others are going to join us. Is there any public participation? Do you see, Kitty? Anybody who's extra?
There are two people there, one of which is the transcriber.
Okay, great. And if anybody, if the people who are the other person wants to make any public comment, this would be the time to raise their hand. No raised hands. So we can't approve the minutes because we don't have a quorum, but what we can do is turn our attention to Brian Bedoli, who's going to give us an update on the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan. And then we're going to talk about how one creates sustainability goals and benchmarking.
All right, great.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, no problem. It's nice to see you all. So we just wanted to provide a couple of brief updates tonight in terms of where we're at with the climate action plan, the RFP, and the sustainability plan. So that has been issued. In terms of the overall process, we had an info session last week to kind of meet with potentially interested firms. We had a really good turnout. We had a number of firms that came, asked questions, expressed a lot of interest, and that resulted in an addendum, which is being released, I believe it's tomorrow. And then we're looking for proposals later next week. So we have a pretty fast procurement timeline, but we've definitely reached out to a lot of people and got a lot of interest. So we'll keep you posted as we get those, and we'll have to form some sort of selection committee, and then try to get that contracted in December to start at the first of the year. It's the plan.
And then once it's contracted, how long does it take for them to? I've heard. How long will it take them to do what they need to do?
We're estimating a 9 to 12 month planning period. We'll get some good existing condition stuff in the first 3 months probably, and there'll be stuff coming along the way that'll help feed this group and the discussions we're having.
So when you talk about existing conditions, can you just tell us about that initial period, what that means?
Yeah, I think that, obviously going to use the community resilience building report as the starting point, which is referenced in the RFP. Then they're going to take a look at what's been done, what people have been doing, what the plans are, what's to do at the state level, local level, and then also look at any plans or reports, maybe the POCD things, to make sure that we're going to be consistent with any other past planning work that's been done. And then also data aggregation. So they're going to be proposing, and we kept the forum pretty open, so they'll probably be proposing different data sets that they feel are going to be important to their planning work. And that's one of the benefits, I think, of the way we approach the procurement. So I think that we'll be able to discuss that as a group to feed that. And then that's typically the first phase. And they'll all be concurrent public outreach, I believe, depending on what scope we ultimately pick, or outreach with departments to help feed that, to kind of just survey the lay of the land.
Great. That sounds good.
How much of a factor will it be? Obviously, the Nature Conservancy, the exercise, the report, I feel like that would probably cut into a lot of, or frankly, speed up the process by saying, look, we've basically done a lot of the work already. Is that right? Is that a fair characterization, or am I wrong?
Yeah, that's the hope. I mean, that's how we structured the RFP. We basically said, like, look, we already did all this work. We met with everybody. We got together in a whole day to talk about everything that's already being done and planned for. So please tell us how we could either implement these objectives or things that we might have missed. So I think there'll be an element of them kind of looking for gaps, but that'll definitely expedite the process. And that's one of the things I think when we interview the consultants, we're going to want to talk about how they actually are going to benefit from that, how we will benefit from that.
So does that 9 to 12 month period, is that built in with the assumption that that time that would be used to determine existing conditions has already been taken care of, or is that what the usual timeline is that might get reduced by what you guys?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's the usual timeline that we might be able to expedite based on the work that we've done. I think, I don't want to commit to too expedited of a timeline, because sometimes you want to let a little room in these for things that come up and different outreach that you think would be important. But yeah, I think we could definitely negotiate it back as a start.
Okay.
I think that was the hope, right?
Yeah, that was the whole point. Exactly. And also the work that we're going to talk about tonight that we're doing too is to hopefully expedite that as well.
Yeah. And let's turn our attention to that, because Josh, this is one of the things that you and I have been talking about what comes first, the resolution or the goals. How do you set those goals for the resolution? So I'm really curious to hear about, how the work you've been doing to get us up to speed.
Absolutely.
Brian.
Yeah, so I'll take it a step back, and I always relate it to not wanting to shoot first and aim later. We're trying to figure out how to, like, which one goes first. But I provided a little bit of a background just to catch everyone up, and I know because we met at the, actually I think it was at Josh's direction or at the last meeting. We said, okay, great, we have this longer term planning process. We really want to hit the ground running. What can be done now? So we met as the core team based on the resilience group that we had previously, the community resilience building workshop group. And we actually discussed that exact thing. We looked at that risk matrix, if you all recall, that talked about the top priorities that came out of each group. And then I'm going to share my screen right now. It's up. Let me see. Give me 1 second here. Something's not happy. Oh, I think I closed it.
Everybody's having computer problems tonight. I think it was a full moon last night. That I think is the problem.
Yeah. There's a lot of problems right now. Let's see here. All right, here we are. All right, good deal. So what Katie helped put together and I went through today is basically kind of our approach to that. And this is just really an update. This is still a work in progress, but we basically took a look at the priorities that we all talked about and we kind of filtered them more based on our discussion. And what we're going to do is go around and kind of fill in the progress of these things and then make a plan to present at the next meeting in terms of the timeline and what we think we could do while we're waiting for this climate action plan to be done.
Amazing.
So we'll assign like a lead department and agency, and then this is more for performance monitoring as we go along and fill in this information. We also, one of the things you'll know that we talked about doing was to conduct an inventory of completed current and future plan projects. So this is again in the theme of trying to benefit the consultant that comes in. And we put out a survey to the whole CRB team, every department head and all of that, asking for this information specifically. So we're going to try to get ahead of that and put together the inventory online. We're still waiting on some responses. So I think what we're going to do, we actually are going to group up some meetings and I'm going to sit down with the department heads and the people that were working like based in public works, based in planning, and just fill this out together. So we can try to get this done before our next meeting is my hope.
Boy, that's incredible to see the inventory. I think that'd be really an interesting thing. That might be worth coming to the whole council too.
Yeah, and I know Steve Kleppen, I think a while talked about outreach meetings. So we'll try to fold them together and we'll have everything kind of put together.
Yep.
So moving forward on that, in terms of the benchmarking, that's kind of where I spent most of my time over the past, since our last meeting. And we've been talking to that group in Berlin that we were, working with for the smart city stuff, looking at data governance, which is sort of a larger project, but they do have a specialty in sustainability. So we got a proposal for those services. I actually got it approved last night at my board. So we're ready to go whenever we are ready. But I have a quick just presentation to tell you what kind of to expect as part of that. And it's open for comment, so we could kind of, talk about it still. That's not set in stone. We're still negotiating the scope. But let me just switch the screen share that I had here and pull this up together. All right. Okay, so what we framed it within the context of the future city or smart city, but it's really focused on sustainability and it's a comprehensive approach to overall livability of the city. So what they do, and I'll show you some examples of it, because we talked about, benchmarking, but what specific benchmarks are we going to be looking at? Why are we looking at those and how are they going to benefit us? So they take this sort of 4-pillar approach. It's referred to as life quality, resilience, environment, and innovation, recognizing that all four are intricately tied. They have a specific index that they developed for this, but a lot of it is also based off of the International Organization for Standardization. So these ISO standards that are sort of the expert agreed upon best practices for sustainability to make sure that you're looking at these specific indicators is what's going to be feeding our analysis. They're going to work with us in more of a workshop research-based setting to talk about, okay, what do these benchmarks mean? How can you continue to assess yourself moving forward once they do identify the initial, set of outcomes that we're trying to strive for? And then obviously the plan is the actionable steps to achieve, better progress in these outcomes. So they're going to look at public data, different documents, do some desktop research in that regard, and then talk about, what our capacity is within the context of this really interesting data visualizations. So what they do is these are those sort of 80 indicators or so that they kind of process map you along within the 4 categories. And then they could basically benchmark you to show you how you map out to other communities.
Wow.
I think we'll be one of the first in America to really kind of do this sort of thing, this level of detailed, data-driven analysis, but we'll be able to compare ourselves internationally into some larger metropolitan areas that have done this. But I think these infographics are pretty helpful. And in terms of sort of what is the meaning behind them, you know, the different categories, it's really, so when they talk about livable city, they're assessing data points, and I'll show you what those look like in detail so you know specifically what I'm talking about. But the concept is to take a look at, you know, distribution of wealth, equity issues, security, attractive public spaces, things that go into the quality of life, you know, and they're talking about them within the context of soft location factors, but these are the things that really make it attractive for people to come to the city, work in the city, start a business in the city, and live in the city. In terms of resiliency, you know, they're looking at things that are able to respond to climatic, demographic, or economic change. So those are specific indicators, which again, I'll go into. Environmentally conscious city is looking at indicators that focus on how we're phasing out CO2 based elements of the economy and how we're striving for sustainable use of resources as a city. And then innovation talks more about sort of the you know, the technological ability for us, and this is going to be fed more by the data governance assessments that we're hoping to do with the city as a whole, trying to prepare the city to go digital, disseminate information in a more clear, transparent, digital, you know, electronic format to help us address these challenges, which are obviously exponentially increasing. So I'll go real quick to show you the benchmark so you can see what this actually means in terms of the data that we're pulling, and tell you a little bit more about ISO and why it is helpful to our whole effort here. Last share. All right, so I don't know how familiar you are with ISO, but there's ISO standards for everything. It feels like it's all like, I mean, my friend's an engineer and he has ISO standards for the threading of screws. So there's pretty much, you can find an ISO standard for anything. And what it is it's basically international experts getting together around the world and figure out the best practices across the board in any axiom or any field. So this one is around sustainable development, and a lot of it's related to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but they've published over, you know, 22,000 types of these standards, and this one's specific to sustainability and resilience in communities. So these are, I'm happy to share this link if any of you are interested, kind of going into these
I'm interested. Yeah.
metrics. Yeah, I'll share it can I share it in the chat in the webinar? I'm not sure. I'll send it out if not.
Send it out, yeah.
So you could go and dive as deep as you want into these and see kind of the things that they're, you know, evaluating. But what we're looking at is specifically related to sustainable cities and communities. They have an indicator for smart cities. They have indicators for sort of environmental economy. But what it really is very granular data where now you're looking at the economic indicators, you know, in terms of, you know, what percentage of contracts have an open data policy for a tech perspective. From an energy perspective, you know, what's our percentage of electrical and thermal energy produced from wastewater treatment, solid waste.
Do we have numbers like that?
Yeah, you could get them. That's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be diving into about these 80, I think it's about 80 to 100 indicators where we kind of process map these and be able to do the comparison along the lines of this. So this is what they did in Berlin that I was telling you about that I was involved with.
Yeah. Where
they basically did a cross comparison over these cities across these indicators. So looking at CO2 emissions, and we could work with them to figure out what we think is most relevant to Norwalk. Some of it might not be, but that's sort of the process by which they're going to be establishing these benchmarks. And again, this goes into that data that we're going to be helping them along the way to hopefully expedite the planning process.
Wow. So this is a process that you're doing that you're going to then share with the people who ultimately get the climate action plan.
Yep. It's almost the way I kind of look at it is like a data-driven version of the workshopping we did for the CRB. You know, now we're kind of diving into this granular research-based phase. That's going to benefit a lot of our other data approaches. Because as we talk, Lisa, one of the things with this group that we're trying to work with, it's not just, okay, here's your set of data, goodbye. We're trying to map out use cases like the tree example I told you about maybe figuring out the data infrastructure at the city to be able to track drought sensors around trees so that we can know when they need to be watered. So we're looking concurrently to this research exercise. We're looking for real pragmatic applications that'll help tee us up from a data perspective and an IT perspective to implement some of the solutions we know are going to come out of the climate action plan in a sort of smart city fact.
Wow. So tracking this whole process. Amazing. And we're one of the first cities in the states to do this.
Yeah, I mean, cities around, they've been doing, there's a lot of use cases, to be fair, you know, there's a lot of New York City's done a lot in Indianapolis, but they're very sort of domain driven. So like DPW is doing something like for pothole management or something. They'll give you an app on your phone that helps you like determine if your car is bouncing, and it'll tell you if you have potholes on that street, and then they're feeding that. But the communities of our size, it's a challenge, and it's going to be a challenge for us to map this out and figure out the whole process around it. But yeah, I would say we're definitely at the forefront for a community our size.
Wow. Good for you, Brian. RDA is paying for that part.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll be supporting them.
I'm
Amazing.
sorry, say that one more time.
Yeah, we'll be supporting that, the RDA. We're gonna
Yeah.
be,
Okay.
That first data collection to do the ISOs.
yep, do all
Yeah.
the ISOs, all the sustainability benchmarking and all of that.
So this is such a naive question. You know, we've often, as common councilor members, we are pressed to, you know, do a resolution like New Haven did with, you know, adopting New Haven's goals for their carbon reductions and things like that.
Was
So
waiting for
how
the
does New
question.
Haven come up with those numbers, and how do they then benchmark that? So how would, if we were to, you know, write a resolution, how does what you're talking about feed into that, coming up with those numbers and those goals? And then how do we measure our
Yeah,
progress?
so I think, you know, obviously wanting a resolution to have meaning and something that can be implemented, right? We always talk about planning, you don't want it to just sit on the shelf. So I think what we could do is we'll obviously get a snapshot of where we're at.
Right.
And then we can work as a community to figure out where we want to be. And then that's what the resolution says, is that you're trying to move towards this target at a certain date. And then we figure out what that looks like.
Yeah, so I got that part, but I'm like going deeper than that. And I'm going like, so how do we come up with that number? Like, and how do we benchmark that we're making progress? I mean, what's realistic? Do we have, you know, for instance, we're moving forward with the leaf blower ordinance. Well, I guess if we could reduce the number of gas leaf blowers in the city, that's something that we could do to gain that, you know, tell me like some specifics about how we might.
Well, I think that's the task item in terms of them working with us. We'll be able to have this conversation with them to figure out how best to get there. I mean, if there's anyone good at setting a benchmark and saying, you know, we're going to be energy independent by 2030, which the Energiewende in Germany, it's the Germans. So we'll be able to have a conversation.
They'll give us those numbers entirely, and they'll just give us some recipes for,
Yep.
if you give up gas blowers, you reduce it this much. If you give up this, you reduce it that much. It's that symptomatic.
We'll be able to have a conversation with them to figure out the best way on the specific indicators, and they'll be able to point us in the right direction, at least.
And I'm also wondering if there are, I mean, I think Lisa brings up a good point, and I think that sometimes in these resolutions, the goals become lofty to a point that they're not reasonably attainable within a reasonable time frame. So for example, they can say something like, we want to be, you know, carbon neutral by 2060, or, you know, some huge number. What I think lofty goals are good. I think we should be ambitious. I think that, I don't think I need to tell you what you already know, which is that, you know, being ambitious is good, and we should be. That's part of who we are as Norwalk. But I do think that, you know, if we're talking what is attainable, but in terms of something like being carbon neutral, which by the way, I don't think is unattainable. I think we can be there. It's just a matter of what we would need to do to get to that point, or, you know, sort of goals that can get us closer to that point, and being able to deal with a lot of the problems that people face, the most prominent of which that we hear from all the time is flooding. Even though this year that was really not on the hot seat because there was a drought. But every time there's a big rain, there's always, and Lisa gets this more than I do, there's always someone talking about this. So I do think that as we're talking about sort of what our goals and our benchmarks are, I think that reasonable but ambitious is, I would think, our through line, right? Like that's sort of what we're shooting for.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And one thing you bring up, one thing I'm thinking about, Josh, I just attended the ULI conference, and ULI does a housing thing where they bring experts to come in like a 3 to 5 day period. They do a number of interviews and you get an amazing report. Apparently they now have one for net zero. So
Oh,
it's
that's
a net
interesting.
zero technical assistance program that talks about, and I could look into that to see what that looks like. That might be an interesting add-on if we have the
Yeah.
funding resources.
And by the way, I love the idea of what you brought up before about how we can use IT and technology, and point out to the city how we can use these things to improve things like climate change. I mean, in City Hall, we talk about trees all the time.
Right.
And there's been a lot of very good improvement on the subject of trees and increasing our tree canopy. As recently as Tuesday, we were talking about it at our council meeting. But it's that next level thing of exactly. I love the implementing technology in the trees to to make sure that we know when they need to be watered or when frankly there isn't enough water.
Right.
So I think that highlighting things like that and knowing sort of how to both communicate it, but also what of these sort of clear technological benchmarks we're going to need to set is the way to set the future course of making Norwalk as sustainable and effective a city of our size as possible.
Yeah,
That was
absolutely.
a lot of word salad.
No, it's good.
But yeah.
I'm following. It's good. I think the one thing too, I didn't explain the larger initiative. So they're basically two needs assessments that we're trying to do. So you have a needs assessment focused on data governance and IT and figuring out the technical limitations in terms of what we can and can't do based on our existing infrastructure. And then we have a use case needs assessment. And I've already told them mobility and sustainability are the two that I think we're going to have the most ability to move. That'll be the most effective. And what they're looking for is 2 to 3 really pragmatic use case examples of how to deploy this technology to demonstrate its practicality and show that the reason for additional investment. So I think that's why the tree example is one, or maybe it's IT, signage.
And by the way, mobility is right at the forefront. I mean, transportation and mobility is, I mean, if we can reduce car dependency in this city, that would do immeasurable good. It's it's a matter of how to do that while also making us competitive and, keep continuing our ability to be competitive and not also overwhelm the citizens who like to drive.
Well, that's kind of where I was thinking about this because, all of this work is going on in the background, but Josh and my job is the public facing part, right? So we need to be able to talk to our citizens to kind of prepare them for some changes. Like, why do we need to spend all this money on electric buses? Why do we need to try to bury our lines? What are these different things that we all think are important that will, so to be able to dream a little bit and then to bring our constituents with us, I think is what we can do to help.
And look, I think that the ultimate argument is going to be not only that it's good for the planet, but ultimately I would imagine it's going to save us money over the long period. And I think that being able to demonstrate the extent to which it will save money for the taxpayers and be able to reallocate it to things that, that they would want the money to go through, everything from community programs to what have you. That is going to be a big focus. And I think that's going to be a big selling point of how we're able to get this across the line.
And is it something that saves money in the short term? I mean, is this something where we have to spend money to save money? And, is that another thing we have to repair?
That's a great question.
I mean, I think that some of these costs are marginal. I mean, we're talking about the cost. So I could tell you short-term savings, for instance, and fortunately we were covered by warranty, but when we did Ryan Park over here, we planted 50 trees or 30 to 50 trees and the drought came and they all died.
Yeah.
Fortunately, we were covered, but if we weren't covered underneath the contractor's warranty, we would have to pay for all those trees. So it's far cheaper to put the little sensor in there and have a little conversation with IT to figure that out.
Yeah, it's funny. I noticed that I live right next to Ryan Park, and that was real. And I didn't know that piece of it, but yes, I mean, and the sensors can't be very expensive.
That's such a shame. They all died.
Yeah, well, not all of them. I think it was a number of them. It's just because the drought came and there was no water.
Yeah, there's no water, and it's a ton of sun right on that spot.
Yeah.
I think what it is just enhancing the communication. So some of these things, some of these grandiose things are going to cost a good amount of money, but there's things that are low hanging fruit, just like we're talking about with our planning. Another use example, which I thought about because a lot of the grants we're putting in for electric vehicle chargers or trying to retrofit so people are using electric. They put sensors in the parking spaces when we repave some of these parking lots to basically determine if it's an electric vehicle there or a non-electric vehicle there to be able to basically keep that space free so that you're getting more electric vehicle charging time than taking it up with someone that shouldn't be parked there. Like little things here and there that we could just be thinking that way. And this is the education piece to help us get to that point.
Amazing. Oh, by the way, we are meeting with that guy on the 16th.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, Josh, you know that there's a man there's a company called Juice Bar in Norwalk where they create, they make the chargers for electric cars.
Yes.
And they're right around the corner from you.
Yes. And I'm pretty sure we have one of our chargers their chargers right in the parking lot of the building element. So, yes, but I know you're meeting with him. That's great.
So I think to your point, your original question about a resolution, right? So I think a resolution oftentimes defines what the elephant is, and we're trying to, but how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. And I think these are the steps that we're trying to identify to get to that point.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a joke about how there's nothing Norwalk loves more than a good master plan.
Right.
But
Yeah. Oh, God.
but I think that though that is sarcastic, one of the important things to take away from as a master plan is that we should flex our muscle and we should be ambitious and we should show our vision. But it is a matter of saying also, and I think whether it's a resolution, and Lisa and I have talked about resolutions many times about it's a communications effort. It's not really there's no force of law aspect to it. It's a matter of saying, this is our vision for the city. Here's where we want to see ourselves in 5 years, or 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is. But that to me is the vision for a resolution, is to say, we want to be here by the end of our term. We want to be here in 5 years. We want to be here in 10 years.
Yeah.
So
What's exciting about this is that this will give Brian a chance to have the platform to just describe that the data that they've done, and then to, when we announce the metrics, they'll be real and we can hold ourselves accountable.
yeah, and I would imagine in terms of a resolution and timing wise, I mean, especially if you're hiring the consultant this year, I would hope that the resolution is something we could start discussing in earnest next spring.
Does that sound realistic?
Yeah, I think, we're going to be getting information through the whole process. We're talking
Yeah.
final report delivery 9 to 12 months, but there's going to be direction and actionable steps along the way.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then it'd be good to have the resolution come out with maybe 1 or 2 things that we're doing right, like electric vehicles and gas powered leaf blowers getting curtailed.
Yep.
Well, also, I know Jim Travers is working on some complete street stuff too. So I think there might be an opportunity with that as well.
Yep. And I know that team on the bike walk team and Tanner Thompson and all those guys are working on stuff like that too. Sidewalks, what have you.
So it's all good. Well, great. Well, thanks, everybody. I don't know if we need to really extend this a lot longer than this, unless there's something else you have, Brian.
Oh, I'm good.
Well, I guess what, what are we talking about a month from now?
Well, I think we're gonna have the consultant ready to be selected. So
Okay.
we'll be talking about the work plan for that for sure, and probably some more informational items on this that we talked about tonight.
So you think the consultant's gonna get hired before the holidays?
I'd
That's
I'd
great.
like it to. I mean, I'm not going away. So I'm here. We'll get it done.
All right.
I'd love to have that as a year end check.
Yeah, I
mark.
want to have that contracted by the end of the year for sure.
Right.
Hit the ground running first, 2023.
Yeah, that's good. That would be great.
Mhm.
That's why we expedited the time frame is to do that. So
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
All
I
right.
really appreciate all your work on this so far, guys. Really.
It's so interesting. The work that Brian's bringing to the city is just super, super interesting. And thank you guys.
And we know it's a team effort.
yeah, thank you, Katie, for sure. She's becoming an environmental planner very quickly.
I know. I love that.
Nerd out with the rest of us.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, team. Well, thank you guys so much. Thanks for making time for this
Fine.
tonight. And
right.
we're good to go.
Take care.
Great
Bye.
evening,
Good night, everybody.